Hello there everybody, I'm Jorge Varela for thebuttonsmasher.com, and this is my review of Odin Sphere Leifthrasir for PS4. So, short version. I've said it before, that there really is no such thing as a perfect game, but this game comes pretty damn close, and I think the last game that I played where I said the same thing was The Witness. So yeah, from back then to now, it is kind of rare for me to say it. And, you know, if you've never played Odin Sphere before, do yourselves a favor and pick up this newer version that already comes packed in with the original anyway. The music, the visuals, story, voice acting, gameplay mechanics, and all of the lore, they're all incredibly well made. It's very much an unforgettable experience that tempts me to say that this might be one of the greatest games of this year and possibly of all time. But hey, you know, why don't you go ahead and listen to the long version of my review to understand where I'm coming from. So, I never thought that I could love this game more than when I did back when it was out on PlayStation 2. Odin Sphere Leifthrasir might seem like just a simple HD port on the outside, but nah, it is a completely different game from the original, and it improves on what it had in almost every single way imaginable, similar to how Persona 4 Golden improves upon the original Persona 4 on PlayStation 2. The simple fact that Vanillaware was capable of making an already beautiful game into something even better, on both technical and artistic grounds, makes me wonder why they aren't praised more often. But of course, even though I sing the praises now, the game doesn't get away without a couple of shortcomings here and there, but hey, we'll get to that as it comes. As a small introduction to the uninitiated, Odin Sphere was a PlayStation 2 action RPG that was released close to the end of the PS2's lifetime. The game begins with a little girl named Alice who begins to read some books, which contain the story of the world of Arion, where the game actually takes place. You can actually read 5 different books that represent the 5 characters you will be playing as throughout the game, all with different and unique perspectives on the story at large. Some of the characters come into direct contact, while some only briefly bump into each other at times. However, that doesn't mean that all 5 of them are kinda stuck in their own bubble, because they're not. In some way, shape, or form, these characters, what they do, and what happens to them will eventually tie together into the greater plot, where everything starts to make a lot of sense, which is an awesome feeling when it inevitably happens. Surrounding these characters is an incredibly colorful world, filled to the brim with creatures, different races of people, and distinct environments, all of them incredibly well drawn and animated in a way that truly makes you feel like you're watching a storybook come to life. On top of the visuals, the audio is pretty great as well, with a fitting soundtrack and a splendid voice cast that bring even more life to these characters than it already did with the visuals. Whether you're hearing the voices in Japanese or in English, you'll have a pretty good time, since both languages do more than a solid job of portraying their roles properly, however large or small they may be. What I really love about this game and its voice work is that there were absolutely no corners cut in the entirety of the game. Everyone from the shopkeepers to the NPCs, everyone is fully voiced. It's not like in other games where smaller stuff like an inn or a side quest doesn't really get voiced at all. But here, everything is voiced. Everything. I think that's awesome, and it shows a certain amount of dedication that you don't even see in AAA titles these days. Seeing all these images that would usually be a good painting or a desktop background suddenly have motion and sound make for a breathtaking sight to behold, especially now that Leifthrasir improves on the technical side that the original lacked on. In the original Odin Sphere, there were many complaints about the frame rate dropping during huge boss battles, making the game practically run at half the speed. And now boasting a nice 1080p resolution and 60 frames per second, Leifthrasir completely does away with that problem like it's nothing, making all the battles all that much more enjoyable. Many of these changes, including new animations, 16:9 aspect ratio, revamped inventory organization, redone alchemy system, and cooking, makes Leifthrasir seem like it's an entirely different thing from the original, while still feeling like Odin Sphere back in the day. If you would ever want to compare and contrast to verify if any of this is actually true or not, then the game has you covered, since it comes with a classic mode that allows you to play Odin Sphere in its original form, with the old mechanics, the old menus, item effects, and even being able to play in 4:3 aspect ratio if you so choose. They even have the original boot up animation where the Atlas logo shows up and everything, and I love it, that's so good! This is exactly the kind of attention to detail that makes me adore everyone involved in the making of what is essentially an interactive work of art. This mode also contains a slew of game options that allow you to manipulate many aspects of the combat to your liking, almost as if the original game is sort of a free play mode, where you can make the game as easy or as tough as possible. So essentially you get 2 games in one, since both play completely different from each other, minus the HD graphics that stay the same for both versions. Of course, I would encourage you to play the Leifthrasir version of this game first, since it streamlines most of the combat and completely overhauls how new information is presented to you, with most of it looking like pages ripped from a book or posters that one would have on the walls of this world. Everything is also written and spoken in a more medieval type of speak, which can immerse you even more. It's awesome how even the documents can be written in character, quote-unquote, but still provide useful information regarding its purpose from a video game standpoint, because before you even realize it, you'll see that items you find have multiple purposes that can only be discovered by either experimenting a lot or by searching every single nook and cranny for new documents. Now, speaking of experimentation, there are also a slew of brand new skills that can be learned for your characters, made even more powerful by collecting phosons and leveling up. So these skills have their own beautifully rendered menu and branches to follow. Unfortunately, a lot of these skills will end up being identical between all 5 characters, but it is still fun to see how they are executed in the battlefield through their own character-specific traits. Not only that, but you're also able to create shortcut commands for each skills. Some button inputs are already provided for you, but you have the choice to actually assign many different kinds of combinations to your skills. You can even do prompts like Street Fighter style quarter circles and half circles, so eventually the combat feels more like a 2D fighting game than an actual action RPG, which I thought was really awesome, especially knowing that I was the one that made the decision to make that happen. Now that we are knee-deep in combat, I wanted to point out some of the shortcomings that the game has, which in the grander scheme of things are pretty minimal problems, but I still feel that they need to be addressed. So for starters, I realize that this is absolutely not a game that you should play in large increments, because it is pretty much guaranteed that you will be absolutely sick of playing it after more than 2 continuous hours. As much as I like the environments and the characters, all 5 stories pretty much feel exactly the same thing, but done in a different order, or it has different cutscenes, or what have you. The level progression, along with the types of skills you gain and the enemies you fight, feel identical from one story to the other, which makes me wonder why they couldn't just have one linear story that switches from one character to the other when it's necessary, rather than having to retread the same territory over and over again 5 different times. And this is made even more apparent knowing that all characters have a total of 7 chapters to go through, with many of them feeling like they could have been better if they were shorter. Many of the stories feel like they drag on for way too long, just for the sake of giving all of the characters an equal amount of levels to play, in which you fight against the same enemies and bosses that you already fought ages ago. Story aside, the combat never feels all that different between all 5 dudes, even though they all have their own unique little trait that sets them apart. However, at the end of the day, most people will end up just button mashing their way through most of the fights without really taking advantage of the overwhelming amount of skills, potions, abilities, and all of the items at your disposal. You can try increasing the difficulty level, but that just kind of serves to waste your time, at least in my opinion, since that basically increases the amount of hits it will take for the enemy to finally fall over, Instead of killing an enemy with 5 hits, you end up killing them with 10 hits, and that just consumes more time rather than actually making it more challenging. In this case, I would tell you all to play the original game, since those mechanics create a better and much more challenging environment for an item management and strategy to be put in place, rather than Leifthrasir that seems to be very much in the business of making you feel overpowered all the time no matter what. One other small problem that I have with the game would be that even back when the original came out, the story, at least during its first half, felt incredibly predictable and even a little bit boring, since most of the narrative is focused on a series of romance stories. It was frustrating to see various characters go down a path that one could already see happen from miles away. There are many baseline things that make the stories feel a bit generic, like the story for Mercedes, one of the fairy characters, that involves her meeting up with a frog that wants a kiss in order to become a human again. So, oh man, I wonder what's gonna happen after that. Like, seriously, a child would be able to figure out what happens next. Fortunately, there are enough characters and variety and different turns in the plot involved that eventually the story does start to come into its own a little bit more, which creates a much more original thing, though it can still be held back at times by generic undertones that feel kind of forced and seem like they don't belong. This at times can be very frustrating, but they're relatively minor issues when thinking about the entire game as a whole, which is, frankly, a wonderful experience. Overall, I had a blast playing this game, even more so than when I first played it on PlayStation 2. if I had to recommend a platform for you to play this on, I would definitely say PlayStation Vita, because the visuals are equally as impressive there as it is in the consoles, and since the gameplay can get incredibly repetitive after a while, I believe that the Vita's portability and the ease of use will be perfect for just playing a couple of levels and putting it down and then continuing on later on in the day. Regardless of where you play it though, Odin Sphere Leifthrasir is still an incredibly good game that is very fun to play and is even more enjoyable to get immersed into. The great production value, along with the outstanding art design and animations, make for a must-own game no matter what. There are a couple of things that bother me about the game, but that doesn't even hold a candle to the amount of enjoyment I had with it. Seriously, this game is a beautiful piece of art. I highly, highly recommend that you pick this game up. Go get it, you have no excuse. Thank you very much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give this video a like. And of course, you can go to our website, thebuttonsmasher.com. We do news, we do reviews, and if you're a fan of podcasts, then be sure to visit that site because we have a lot of them. All of that content is created by really fun people that love what they do, so we highly appreciate your support.